Chapter 1. Christian looked into the tops of the trees, seeing the slight breeze, and feeling more than ever this season the crisp, cool autumn air. It was getting to be mid fall, and soon, in this mountain, in this generally cold region, it would quickly become true fall and then very quickly winter. This would be his second winter here since the tragedy that ripped him from his previous life and found him now dwelling alone, isolated in a small cabin on top of this mountain. He was out on an afternoon hike, doing a little bit of hunting, looking for food. Following closely behind him is his golden retriever, Jax. Jax, ever alert for any wildlife or dangers that may present themselves. Christian had become a simple man. At one point, he worried about the things that everybody else worried about. He worried about money, his car, his house, his status. Most of all, he worried about his family, but now all that was taken away. And one unforeseen, but often in his mind, maybe could have been stoppable tragedy. He lost everything. He lost his family. He lost his job. He lost everything. And his job really didn't even matter. It's just once he lost his family, there was nothing for him. The city went dark. His spirit went dark, and he just felt it was time to somehow get away. So Christian took his money, he took his savings, he cashed in some stocks, even his little bit of money he built into his retirement fund, and he cashed it all in. Taking that money, he was able to hire various people that helped lead him to where he is now through the use of a small airplane company, a realtor, and some other people that he hired along the way. Christian was able to purchase about 100 acres in a remote, very desolated, small mountaintop just into the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. The nearest village or town, several hours away, probably at least 75 to 80 miles. Other than a forest ranger that operated out of a small station about 15 or so miles down the side of the mountain. He really didn't have any neighbors, any communication with anyone. He actually didn't even have technology. He left it all behind. All he had was a sat phone that had very limited communication abilities to where he could call the ranger station, or if absolutely necessary, he could call his sister. As far as supplies went, Christian had thought all that through, and although he had learned from someone who to become someone different than who he had been, he did now know how to hunt. He understood the outdoors and knew how to take care of himself to that extent. He did have a deal worked out with a company that he hired and had paid prior to his coming to reside full time on the mountain. He had contracted that company to once every 6 months drop off supplies. There was an open field just about 2 miles to the east of where he had his cabin, and they would drop the supplies off there in crates. No contact, no talking to anyone. They would simply drop the supplies off. He would gather them up at his own pace and get them to his cabin. Mostly dry foods and some other items that he, of course, couldn't get on his own or couldn't manufacture out here in this cabin. He had, in a sense, isolated himself from the world and truly was the one and only person that lived in his world, other than, of course, Jax, his ever faithful companion. Jax had adjusted well, too, going from the family pet with a pretty easy suburban life to becoming a dog that was bent on protecting his master and helping his master survive in what was a totally different element than either one of them had been in before. Christian wasn't really sure what the future purpose of his life was. He had really not even began to scratch the surface on the grief and the guilt that he felt when he lost his entire family all in one night. He did feel bad that he had not communicated with his sister since the day he moved full time to his mountain. He had warned her and told her a little bit about what he was planning. She thought it was crazy and begged him to stay and try to regain some semblance of a normal life, but Christian just couldn't do it. He'd had enough of the world and was ready to be isolated and alone with his thoughts. As they rounded a small curvature in the forest, Jack started getting really excited and barking loudly, and Christian looked far ahead and saw what almost appeared to be a person. But he knew better. He knew there was no way there was somebody there. But with the coming of the autumn twilight, the days were getting darker quicker. It was hard to make out for sure what the shape was. As he quickly calmed Jax down and they slowly, silently started to approach, when they got within about 1,000 yards, he realized it was more than likely a deer, but it bolted and he wasn't really able to fully get any kind of shot at it, so it escaped. But that was all right. He had food. His third supply drop was due in just a few weeks, and that would be the one to really help him get through the window of winter. It would provide him with soups and other foods that he could cook on his small stove that he had inside of his cabin, and that would help him to be nourished and to get through the harsh winter that was coming. And sometimes in the back of his mind, Christian wondered, did it really matter anyway? Was he actually trying to stay alive, or was he just existing until he could finally join the rest of his family? The only obligations he felt in the world were to Jax, who at about 8 years old still had probably 4 to 6 good years left in him, and of course to his sister. But again, he felt like he had almost abandoned her. She had been recently divorced when the tragedy struck Christian's family, and he was unable to help her through that. She did have custody of her young daughter, so he also had a niece. But truly, that was it. That was his family: a sister, a niece, a couple of cousins he didn't speak to or hadn't spoken to in years, and Jax. And there was nothing left, nothing else to tie him to this world. But Christian tried not to dwell on these thoughts. He tried not to dwell on any thoughts. He mostly just tried to spend each day in survival mode, gathering, hunting. There was a couple streams, creeks that were not that far from his cabin where he could fish. And of course, there were several springs where he could get fresh water whenever he needed that. So, really, his only real goal was just to get through the day, to make his life bearable as possible, and to not dwell on something that he had no control over. Basically, he lived in a state of grief, but tried to almost to blank his mind throughout the day as much as possible. But with the failed attempt at the deer, and with the fact that maybe 20 minutes, maybe a half an hour at the most, darkness would truly settle in, he whistled to Jax and motioned to follow, and began the trek back to his cabin. He's probably a little less than a mile from the cabin, and wanted to make sure they got there before dark so they could be secure and safe inside, as the cool, crisp autumn winds became cold, semi-strong winds at night. And also, of course, there was wildlife and stuff that you didn't really want to be around after dark. So with that, Jax, now in tow, Christian began to make his trek back to the cabin. End of chapter 1.